solve everything. Many or some old problems will remain. Of course, the biggest one of all is climate change, but this is a major new factor. And also in terms of course, humanitarian crisis. I think it was already mentioned, it's clearly the largest humanitarian crisis in Europe, probably from the end of the Second World War. And I think it does make more humanitarian crises more likely, because I think, as I was saying, this reinforces this trend, which I think was visible already for a number of years, of increasing competition between great powers, between established great powers like United States, between emerging or re-emerging great powers like China or Russia, between regional powers like Saudi Arabia and Iran. And this means that we have seen more and more internationalized civil wars. We have seen more and more proxy wars, indirect wars between these clashing great powers, usually using a different place, a different country, a local conflict as a proxy for the clash between them. So I think this is a major factor. Of course, this is a strategic reading of what is happening. This does not mean that we cannot and should not make a normative reading. I think it's obvious that in light of the UN Charter, what happened was an unlawful act of aggression, which is not allowed since 1945. War is not a normal instrument of statecraft. Only legitimate defense is accepted as legal in light of the UN Charter after 1945. So this is a different aspect. And of course, the two are connected, right? So we just saw, for instance, this vote in the United Nations to suspend Russia from the Human Rights Council. It doesn't have much of a practical impact. The UN Human Rights Council is tragically powerless, but it is significant in terms of diplomatic relative diplomatic isolation of Russia. But of course, if we look more carefully at the vote, we will notice that yes, there are 93 countries voting, let's say, against Russia, but there are many more countries now abstaining, important countries, large countries like Brazil or India, and countries like China, for instance, who abstained in the first vote condemning the invasion, now have voted against the suspension of Russia. You know, Russia is not completely isolated. There are important countries that are either unwilling to align with one or the other, or are in a way favorable to Russia. But in any event, I think it's safe to say this is a major turning point, more specifically in terms of Europe. And I will try to end in this second point, not to take too long. I think that in terms of the European order, another crucial objective of the Russian invasion was to show the force of Russia, but also show the division in the Western alliances, in Western organizations, in particular NATO, and between Europeans and Americans, but also within the EU, within the European Union. We know that Russia has invested a lot in influencing countries across the EU, countries like Hungary, for instance. And I think the expectation was that the EU, NATO would be unable to present a united front or any kind of significant measures, be it militarily, in terms of providing military aid to the Ukraine, providing troops to the Eastern or Central European countries that neighbor this area, or in terms of the economic response of the EU, in terms of economic warfare, in terms of sanctions. And I think, yes, there are tensions, there are divisions that remain. We just saw that Orban was re-elected as president of Hungary. But the fact of the matter is that the level of cohesion, the level of solidarity, and also the level of ambition in terms of measures to counter the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think exceeded a lot what most experts expected, what probably many Western leaders thought would be possible and would have popular support, and what the Kremlin thought was likely. So I think this is also significant. Of course, it's safe to say that tensions and divisions will emerge. In fact, in part, they have already emerged. For instance, the last European Council, there were these tensions about how to manage the energy crisis. Spain and Portugal were very critical of the fact that the energy market in the EU is tightly connected with the price of gas. This is in the interest of countries like Germany, for instance, that depend very heavily on gas, but not of countries who have invested a lot on renewable energies like Spain and Portugal. So we already saw some divisions, but they are divisions about how to manage the implications of this united front against Russian aggression. They are possibly divisions about how to spend this huge amount of new money that has been promised in terms of investment in defense. I think it's undeniable that there is a major turning point here. When you see countries, even outside of the EU, like Switzerland, which has historically always been neutral, which historically always saw economic diplomacy and its economic and financial interests as the absolute priority of its external action, when you see even Switzerland becoming part of these sanctions. When you see countries like Sweden or Finland, again, historically neutral, for the first time, a majority of the population saying, we think we should become part of NATO, I think it's clear. And most of all, when you see Germany, which was radically transformed by the trauma of the Second World War, always a reluctant power, always extremely reluctant about using military power or providing weapons, for the first time putting those kind of taboos in question, raising 100 billion euros of new expenditure on defense. You can see that this is a major turning point. So it doesn't solve every problem. It doesn't create this kind of magical unity. But again, history tells us that this is normal. You know, now sometimes we have a romantic vision of history. During the Second World War, there were terrible tensions, terrible discussions between the Western allies. I'm not even mentioning the Soviet Union, but even between Churchill and Roosevelt and de Gaulle, there were terrible differences, terrible discussions. But there was always a notion, as was also the case during the Cold War, where there were also major crises and divisions, for instance, between France and the United States. But there was always a notion that what was the main threat? What were the limits of those divergences in terms of maintaining cohesion, maintaining effective deterrence? So I think this is potentially also a new lease of life and an opportunity for the EU and NATO to gain new legitimacy, to invest more in a coordinated way, and to become much more effective. My main problem, or my main question, is the more the conflict is prolonged, the more difficult it will be to manage. This is true for Russia, but it's also true for Western allies, especially economic impact. And there, I think the EU really has to be serious about a war economy. In a war economy, you need war debt. You need to invest seriously in new technologies, for instance, in terms of energy, for instance, in terms of defense, also in avoiding that this economic warfare results in more bankruptcies in Western Europe than in Russia. I don't think that is likely, but certainly if there is significant bankruptcies, unemployment, this will become a major problem, no matter how much public opinion is sympathetic towards Ukraine. So I think it is incumbent upon European institutions to come up with solutions. I think it's probably too optimistic to think that simply the existing plan to respond to the pandemic crisis will be enough to deal with all of this. So that's my main question, my main doubt. And I think I'll finish there. Thank you very much for your patience, and I'll stay for a bit longer, but I will have to leave in a few minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bruno, for your very insightful reading of all these changes, not only in Europe, but also in the world. But in fact, Europe is changing and some strengths are being shown at this point. And although there are several countries to which the Ukrainian refugees are going to, Poland is in fact the country that is receiving most of these refugees. And now addressing Professor Roland Radzicki, I would like to ask him about the current situation in Poland and this crisis at the border with Ukraine. What is the current scenario? Can you give us an overall picture of what is happening and the dynamics that are going on, Professor?
Thank you very much. Thank you for organizing the seminar and for the invitation. It's an honor and pleasure to be here with you and share my insights about Poland. actually, after what Bruno said about the general situation, I think everything is pretty much addressed in this international context. So I would like to focus on very specifically on this image of the situation in Poland. And I prepared a short presentation, and if you allow me, I will try to share my screen now, and
yes,
maybe maybe it will work. Just please let me know.
Yes, it's here. We can see it.
Okay, this is great. So, yep. All right.
And it's on full screen. Yes.
Okay,
fine.
very well.
Thank
you very much. Thank you for confirming that. So, just a few words of introduction. I represent Collegium Civitas, which is a small university based in Warsaw. We are specialized in social sciences. And why I'm mentioning this, because when I said we are small, it means in particular that we have 3,000 students. And the thing is that among the 3,000 students, we have more than 400 Ukrainian students. So, and this is important somehow, because it also shows you how close our states, our nations are also today, at least. So we have that many students, Ukrainian students in Warsaw, and they haven't come to Warsaw during the past months. They are with us for many years now. And also one thing to mention is that when the war started, more than 100 of them were actually in the Ukraine, because at this stage, still after the pandemic time, we teach in this hybrid mode. So some of the classes are conducted online, and these students were joining the classes, sitting in some cellars or bunkers in Kiev, and from time to time, the bombs were just hitting the places where they were connecting with the class. So I'm just mentioning this, but this is like a much larger phenomenon actually, and this shows you how this strategy affects also other people. For our teachers, for our Polish students, this was a traumatic experience. Of course, the victims are there, I mean, in the Ukraine, but we here in Poland are very much involved also for this type of reasons. And also another thing to mention is that the relations, the historical relations between Ukrainians and Poles are very, very long. We are neighbors for centuries or ages, and there were bad times and good times between these nations. There were also, after the Second World War and during the Second World War and after the Second World War, there were also mutual accusations for war crimes of the Ukrainians committed on Polish civilians, and the other way around, etc. So these are pretty difficult relations. But on the other hand, on the other side, today, almost everyone is really committed, and we feel like we are overwhelmed with this feeling of solidarity with this Ukrainian nation, with whom we had, as I said, very different and difficult sometimes relations. But today, nobody thinks about it. Nobody remembers these bad times. But we are all very much committed to helping them. So this is the general. I would say this is the big picture, and this is somehow I think interesting from the sociological point of view itself. But I will I will get back to this aspect once again at the end of my presentation. So I would like to briefly say about three things. First, about the current refugee situation. Secondly, about the challenges to come, and third point being the ideological insights. And then I will refer once again to this relation between Poland and the Ukraine in general. So just to show you some statistics, or maybe maps showing depicting some statistics. This is the current situation. This is the map created yesterday or 2 days ago, and actually you see that there are some movements of Russian troops. They are regrouping. The situation, military-wise, the situation changes somehow. Here you see on the left-hand side, you see the border with Poland. And this is, as it was already mentioned, this is the main border through which the Ukrainians try to escape, the refugees somehow move towards European Union. So this means major shifts movements of the population within the Ukraine, but also a large amount of people crossing the border and moving west. We don't have too much time to look at this map, so I'm just showing you the geography and the current situation in this region. So here you have another map where you see you have also the numbers. So you see that already 2.5 million people moved through this Polish-Ukrainian border, but also significant amounts like hundreds of thousands of people moving to Hungary, moving to Romania, to Moldova, to Belarus also. So as we all know, big masses of people trying to escape. And also you see the star-like points here, star-like dots in this map signify new incidents, new war incidents causing more and more havoc in the Ukraine. Also, there are, as you can imagine, there are lots of organizations, governmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, UN agendas, etc., that are trying to support this flow of people, trying to help assist those who are in need, and try to also somehow organize and navigate this movement, because of course this is at the end of the day, this is also in particular a huge, a massive logistical operation. So here you see the key routes through which these people try to move from the Ukraine towards west. And there are, let's say, three main lines. This Zion brown here, as you see in the north, also the Ontario green here in the middle, and also the Yellowstone path. And at this moment, at least at this stage, there are not that much congestion along these routes, so that the movement of the people is pretty smooth, and those who really intend to leave Ukraine at that moment, they are able to do so. So in the previous weeks there were more queues and more difficulties with that, but at this stage somehow the situation, with at least with the movement, the flow of the people was stabilized. In terms of numbers, here you see the daily entries and exits at the Polish-Ukrainian border. So you see that these numbers are not that huge as they used to be in the previous weeks. So during one day, you see that we had 20,000 people entering Poland, and you can say 14,000 leaving Poland in direction of the Ukraine, because of course the movement from west to east is also present there at this. At the hand side, you see the diagram showing you the number of people crossing the border each day, actually, with the peak of 146,000 people during one day. And here on the excuse me, that was on the left hand side, and on the right hand side you have the cumulative diagram showing you the total number of people, and at this moment it's more than 2.5 million according to this set of data. Of course, these sets of data differ slightly depending on the source, but more or less this is this amount. Also here you see on the other hand, on the other side, you see the number of people going back to Ukraine, and of course they have many different interests. Some of them go back and forth because they support other people to move, for example, so this is the reason why they cross the border. But there are also many people who really go there just to join Ukrainian military forces and get involved directly into the war, in the war. So there are like, especially like Ukrainians who used to work in Poland, typically men who go there to fight. Yeah, here also some figures showing you the scale of this tragedy. As also it was emphasized by Bruno that that it's the biggest humanitarian crisis in Europe since the Second World War, and here these numbers prove it actually. So you have more than 4 million people in total, more than 4 million refugees. You have 1 million people in the Ukraine already assisted. This is official statistics actually, but there is 1 million people in the Ukraine supported, assisted by the World Food. Apologies, I forgot what.
World Food Program.
Yeah, exactly. World Food Program, exactly. And you have 400,000 people in the Ukraine that were supported by assisted by the Ukrainian Red Cross. You have also, this is also something that we heard about during the past few days from the Humanitarian Rights Watch, that there were multiple cases of laws of war violations against civilians in the Ukraine. The death toll, you see, also a really, really tragic number of 1,430 people. And in Poland, we have, at this moment, we have lots of Ukrainians, but this is also very difficult to judge and to decide and to count who of them is a refugee actually, because we had people from the Ukraine in Poland. We had roughly speaking 2 million people, 2 million of Ukrainians in Poland before the war started. So they were like typically working here part-time, moving back to Ukraine, moving back to Poland, being in constant move, actually, on a constant move. And today it's very difficult to say how many of them are actually refugees and how many of them just came here or stayed here when the war started, etc., etc. So I would say that people estimate that we have 2 million refugees, like war refugees, but definitely more Ukrainians. And out of this 2 million of refugees, we have already 700,000 registered refugees, in the sense that they are kind of treated as Polish citizens because they are being given an official digital citizen number, which is called in Polish, it's PESEL. And we have already 700,000 people with this PESEL, which is a very big number actually. And if you, for example, many of these people, many of the Ukrainians, they come to and they stay in Warsaw, and actually you can imagine a city that almost doubled its size during a few weeks. And this is, again, of course, we observe this tragedy, but speaking in terms of logistics, this is like a massive logistic thing going on our eyes, and this is also difficult for the city to somehow sustain it, maintain it. And among the 700,000 people, maybe that's also an interesting figure, we have 96% of women with children, 3% of men who are actually 65 plus, and less than 1% of men who are below 65 years old. And now the second point of my short presentation is related to the challenges to come that we observe. And yeah, just to mention, because we don't have time to go into details of each one of them, but these are very interesting. Of course, always to emphasize it, these are tragic observations, but on the other hand, they're also somehow interesting how it works, political wise, economic wise, sociologically, social wise, etc., etc. And when we observe them, we try also to understand why it's going on like this, why the situation develops in this and not the other way. And at the end, I will tell you a few really intriguing details. And here, first of all, lack of coordination and relevant policy at the governmental level. Of course, you can observe in the maybe you can observe in the media, also in Portugal, Polish government saying and being proud of how Poland supports the Ukraine. But to be honest, or at least this is a point of view of me and many people with whom I spoke, and also it is somehow depicted in some reports, at least according to my opinion, that this is the support that is a bottom-up support, actually. This comes directly from the heart of Polish citizens, and this is, in this sense, this is unorganized. Of course, the government officially announced this and encourages people to do this. But the thing is that we lack this governmental organization and, for example, legal framework. And this is a big difficulty these days. One of the consequences is the lack of coordination of the assistance, actually, for these refugees. And for example, it is a purely logistical question again. So we have a lot of materials, we have a lot of resources that should be delivered, and these people who are in need should be matched somehow with the sources of I don't know, food, or clothes, or places to stay, shelter, etc. But this doesn't work as smoothly as it could, because it's all organized, as I said, bottom up. Also, many non-governmental organizations, being now very close to the border, they are there, they are ready to help, but for example, at the place where they are, there is nobody to help to, because it's all badly managed somehow. So these are these type of difficulties. Then third point here in this list, this is the efficiency of public systems in Poland, and especially healthcare. So at this moment, we don't feel it, at least to this extent, as to which it can hit us. But even before the war started, Polish healthcare system was not efficient, to say the least, especially in after the confrontation with the coronavirus pandemics, etc. It just showed us that we are not able to maintain all these processes. And now we have an extra 2.5 million citizens, roughly speaking, which means, and many of these people also harmed, like by these war operations in the Ukraine. So this is another major challenge for such a state as Poland, let's say. Then, of course, economic challenges will follow, including labor market issues. And I would say, roughly speaking, because we don't have time to discuss it in detail, but roughly speaking, this is good for Polish economy, that we will have new people, new potential employees who are ready to enter the market, the labor market today in Poland. But the problem is that first of all, it's not sustainable, because we don't know how it will develop. So this is pretty difficult for the companies, for example, to manage. And secondly, as you can guess, at this moment, it's all right, because everyone is in solidarity with Ukraine, and people have very favorable approach and like hospital approach, etc. But in 3 months, 4 months, half a year, clearly we can expect tensions between Polish employees and Ukrainian employees, and all these accusations that we know very well from the past, that these migrants are coming and are taking our jobs, actually. So at this moment, we don't see it, but we can, and we should be prepared that it will happen for the situation when it happens. Then another point is the violence, frauds, extortion, again, in the context of the Ukrainians coming. We have incidents, we also had incidents with rapes, etc. So this is another, let's say, criminal aspect of all this story, and this is the violence against the refugees. Of course, on the other hand, right-wing extremists, some of them at least, will emphasize the violence inflicted by the refugees against Poles, etc. So again, another important and interesting aspect of the story. Then a very important point. It's in the middle of my list, but maybe it should be number one, actually. And this is the war trauma and this adaptive shock and this emotional shock of these people who are coming here. this terrible situation, psychologically speaking, mental-wise, etc., in which they are here. And some of them are really tough, but definitely not all of them. And actually, this is something so difficult to describe and to monitor that we are pretty blind in this area, and we actually don't even know what is going on with these people emotionally in their emotional sphere, for example. Of course, we try to support them. So, for example, in case of my university and in case of our students that come from the Ukraine, we start with this emotional and psychological support, but this is very difficult already, even though we put a lot of effort to secure this aspect. But in case of many of these refugees, imagine 2.5 million people, imagine it again, it's very difficult to approach 2.5 million people asking them what are your emotional problems these days, etc., etc. So this is a very important blind spot, I would say. Then next point, I've already somehow addressed this moods and aversion to refugees, and at this moment this is almost non-visible, so we don't see it. These are like incidents, as I said, they are very rare incidents. But if it lasts longer, after half a year, after 1 year or 2 years, we should expect more and more of these situations to happen, and we need to prepare ourselves for that somehow. Another point, relations with Belarusians and Russians. We have a lot of Belarusians and Russians in Poland. So imagine problem of these people and problems of Ukrainians, between Ukrainian refugees and these people. Also in the context of my university. In one class, we have students from the Ukraine, from Belarus, from Russia. Try to conduct a class with these students and, for example, discuss the issue. And regarding the scenarios for the future, maybe I will skip this point because we don't have time for that probably. And I would like to show you a few more ideological insights at the end of my presentation. So first of all, this attitude toward refugees used to be an important political motive in Poland for years. And actually, the current government and the current ruling party, Law and Justice, this is the name of the party, Law and Justice, they used this motif of, let's say, aversion towards refugees as one of the key motives to win the elections. So this is an important point to take into account when we speak about attitude of Poles towards migrants. But on the other hand, we accept Ukrainians with no hesitation these days. And this is a really like a miracle, you can call it a miracle, or this is really astonishing that it happens, that people just accepted this society that was so much against any war refugees from Syria, from Afghanistan, from any other place in the world. This society accepted 2.5 million Ukrainians these days. And this is the graph, actually. This is from the last year. Yeah, so it was, nobody knew that it will happen. Of course, some people expected this to happen, but nobody knew that 2.5 million people will come to Poland. And this is the attitude towards refugees in general in Poland. And in green, you see those those people who claim, or their attitude is that we should accept the migrants no matter what. This light green means that we should accept migrants for a short period of time, and after that they should go back to their country. And then in red you see those who say we shouldn't accept any migrants in Poland in any case. And you see that these numbers are beyond 50%, yeah, to say the least. And of course, in gray, you also have those that have no opinion. So this is just the proof, just to show you that what is the general attitude to migrants of Polish people. And then a key role, and it was also it was also manifested in the context of the Belarusian Polish border crisis last year, when we had a lot of refugees who stuck on the border between Poland and Belarus. maybe you heard about definitely you heard about it. And then the role of politics and media is not to be overemphasized in all this story, because today we have only positive media and political communication regarding Ukrainian migrants. And even I would say, I would like to say it, that today this approach, this positive approach to Ukrainians, is even an opportunity to gain social recognition. So sociologically, we observe even competition between Poles that try to prove how much they help, how much they support. They are showing off their support to Ukrainians, and this is also very interesting sociological phenomenon. One more graph that I wanted to show you. With a colleague of mine, actually, we are studying the structure of right-wing ideologies, and this is maybe something that is also intriguing. Here you see a graph of relations between views on various aspects of general political life, etc. And if you consider the approach of the right-wing ideologies in Poland, because this survey was made in Poland, so if you ask these people, what's your approach to migrants? This approach, this attitudes towards migrants, is very strongly correlated with a number of factors, like, for example, their attitudes to general human equality, to pacifism, to racism, and to interestingly enough, to their attitude toward Israelis, etc. But the Ukraine, as you see on the right-hand side, the Ukraine is on the completely different corner. So to put it short, according to our research, the attitude toward migrants has nothing to do for a Polish citizen with his or her attitude towards Ukrainians. And this might be one of the explanations of this phenomenon that Poles didn't accept refugees, but they accepted 2.5 million of Ukrainians. And this is it from my side. Thank you. I will be happy to answer all your questions. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ron, for such insightful presentation. You are in the moment, living the moment, and in fact, you can have a reading that is much closer to the action than ours. And it's very interesting to see all these numbers and even your experience from class in this scenario. Thank you so much. There are some questions coming in our chat. We will organize them and ask them to our guests after the three guest speakers talk. So now let's move on. And we have with us Professor Paulo Pedroso. And I will ask you, so after these presentations, we are already starting to evolve into these response, civil response and refugee response, humanitarian action in action. What is your reading on these topics?
First of all, thank you for having me here. Sorry. Thank you, Ana Lucia. I think that after listening to Bruno and Roland, we have a clear picture of what's going on one hand, from the, let's say, political, geopolitical point of view, on the other hand, from the beginning of the humanitarian crisis. And going directly to your question, Ana Lucia, my first point would be that we must be aware that we are in the very beginning of the humanitarian crisis. And in the beginning of humanitarian crisis, we have movements like Roland identified. So normally people move and find this bottom-up solidarity in the neighboring countries, in the neighboring populations. In Ischgl, with Joana Azevedo, we have a project, an Erasmus project on human mobility and the refugee crisis. We saw that with Colombian people in the border with Venezuela, or we saw that, for example, with Turkish people in the border with Syria. And so typically in this first phase, we will see human solidarity, we will see engagement, we will see sympathy, because, let's say, for each of these contexts, Latin America, Middle East, now Europe, these are our refugees, are those with which we identify. We don't see them really as fully foreigners. Quite often, it's not only being students in the same universities, but quite often we have some even, let's say, even connections, friends, old family ties, let's say, that are used in this stage. And also in this first phase, the organized humanitarian action community is very active. And so we have all these, as Roland was saying, all these, let's say, logistic operations being put in place with NGOs suddenly moving from their old theaters to this new intervention theater. And there is a knowledge in the world and the capacity, and let's say with the High Commissioner for Refugees and with the big NGOs, today the world is able to be quickly where a crisis arises. But we should think about something that Bruno said, and that we saw, and as I worked in Turkey during the Syria war, I saw it happening in Turkey. That is the moment in which, let's hope it does not happen, but the war keeps going, not after 50 days, but after 12, 18 months. And here we have a degradation of the situation at all levels. First, one thing that we might be forgetting, even at this stage, is there is a lot of human suffering in the internal displaced and in those that are in the war zones. So typically, what we should expect, thinking of the way Russia does war, of what they did in Aleppo, what they did in Grozny, is that there will be curfews, there will be, let's say, siege to cities for long term, that will imply starvation, that will imply, let's say, blockage of, let's say, basic services, absence of water, gas, electricity. So imagine next winter with no gas and electricity in cities under siege. And I believe that this question of the crisis within Ukraine should not be forgot from our approaches. And we don't know when the government of Kiev will start having the classic logistical problems to let's say, to have food for these people and to have basic human services. On the other hand, regarding the situation in the, let's say, in the neighboring countries, I think that as Roland was saying, the pressure over let's say the basic systems will start increasing. It's not only the pressure over health. It's, for example, the question of educating the Ukrainian kids. So in this first phase, we are, let's say, focusing obviously on, let's say, stabilization, emotional stabilization, on emergency answers. But if we start preparing to have, let's say, a group of, I don't know which size, but probably will be of hundreds of thousands or of millions of people in the neighboring cities, in the relocation centers within Poland. Poland will have, I saw it in Turkey again, a huge pressure to have, let's say, education of all levels available for these students and for these kids. And this is also, let's say, a big pressure. And connected with that, it will come quickly the question of the participation in labor market. So these families, as Roland said, we almost have no males in active age, which is typical from a refugee population in which they are going back to fight. But we have lots of people in active age. And so this will create pressure on labor markets that might erode this solidarity, because that's the moment in which, let's say, even my friend from the other side of the border will be seen as taking my place. And this leads me at this level to the second question that I believe is now it's starting to be thought about, that is how Europe will act. And there is here a kind of, I would say, a kind of change, because, for example, the countries that were more against an European answer to the refugee crisis in the Middle East, among those countries were, for instance, Poland and Hungary. Now, probably they will be among those that are, let's say, more willing to have, let's say, a European strategy for relocation. And I think that very quickly we will need to have, let's say, an integrated European approach, as we had with the Middle East crisis. And this will imply that, in a certain sense, this issue will be disseminated and will be more formalized. The more successful it is, the more ability to reduce the pressure over the neighboring countries. And I hope here Europe shows the unity that did not show in other humanitarian crises. And I hope this can become a lesson also for the way Europe is able to deal with humanitarian crisis in general. And this will be a big challenge for all of us, of course, even more for Germany. Having said that about, let's say, the immediate question of the humanitarian crisis in Europe, so my point is we should be ready for a crisis that is going to take long. So we need to start preparing for something that, even if the war stops relatively quickly, will take time to be absorbed. And if the current prospects, let's say, that are probably pessimistic, of having 1 or 2 years of war, in that case, it would be even worse. There is a different plan in which I would like to share some thoughts. That is, if you want, the global footprint of this humanitarian crisis. Because we are now thinking about Ukrainian refugees, but you see the disruption in the production of cereals in Ukraine and Russia probably will kill people in South Sudan in September. So because we have, let's say, this is creating a food problem. So this war has indirect effects in contexts that were already very fragilized. And I'm thinking immediately, mostly in all the African countries that have problems with, let's say, with food, and that were depending on these cereals. Even countries that are stabilized, like Egypt, are already showing signs of being under stress. And we will need an humanitarian action regarding food in contexts that are far away from this war, if we want to prevent, let's say, a new famine for the last quarter of this year. Probably, as it seems that United Nations is attentive to this problem, we still don't know the magnitude. But this, I think, shows us the other dimension of this global footprint, that is, the economic disruption is not only creating inflation pressures and the gas and energy problems, let's say, in Europe, it is a threat to systems that are already very, 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 very fragile in other contexts. And here, I think, I don't want to seem too political in this, but there is one thing that I fear, that is the erosion of the isolation of Russia. And we start seeing it. Bruno mentioned one thing that I think it's important. Let's say, Russia is less isolated in this vote of today than it was in the first vote on the condemnation of the aggression. And we see in the countries that abstain, and now also in the countries that voted against the suspension of Russia in Human Rights Council, for example, several African countries, including all the Portuguese-speaking African countries. So the idea that we have sometime here in let's say, in Europe, that Russia is fully isolated, indeed, it's not clear for me that this is going to happen. And so we are in a situation in which we have the Western world united, but what in the past were the non-aligned countries. So this is a language that we thought were already outdated. But all these, let's say, all these countries, as well as the Asian countries of the former Soviet Union, let's say, at least hesitant in condemning, let's say, in condemning Russia. And this, to me, creates, let's say, the risk of something that is not exactly a humanitarian crisis, but that is a kind of new wave of economic crisis with, let's say, a slowdown of globalization. Ana Lucia knows much more than me about this. I just wanted to point it out. That is, these, let's say, if the sanctions movement increases as it looks like, because it doesn't look like NATO is willing to enter in an escalation, and so, let's say, openly entering militarily. So there will need to be an answer. And the answer seems clear. It's waves of sanctions that are, let's say, every day one step further. We are now already in the 5th wave. So 50 days of war, 5 waves of sanctions. And these sanctions in this moment are somehow very selective and don't apply the comprehensive concept of sanctions that, for example, was used against Iraq. That is, let's say, West countries are sanctioning Russia, but are not sanctioning those that don't sanction Russia. So we are not stopping our trade with Chinese that sell to Russia or with Indians that sell to Russia. And the rationale of an escalation of sanctions would be sooner or later entering in this, let's say, in this field, and this probably would be also an aggravating factor. So basically, to sum up, let's say, I think that after the insights of Bruno and Roland, let's say, we knew everything about, let's say, these precise contexts. So my point, I would say, is we need to be ready for a long-term operation with, let's say, all the typical things, including cooperation planning and a challenge on how Europe will absorb this crisis. I'm really concerned about the people inside Ukraine, so about the internal displaced and the degradation of the capacity to support them. And so we can see sins that in Europe we forgot since World War II, extreme sins of famine, of let's say, social disintegration, of incapacity of the states, things that happened in Syria, but we kind of turned the blind eye to, let's say, to them. I'll say we were sympathetic, but saw it as very distant. Things much more intense than we have seen in former Yugoslavia. And third, we are seeing, let's say, the local footprint, but the global footprint of this war will, in a couple of months, start appearing. It will start by the risk of a food crisis, but it can be extended with, let's say, strong effects on economy that, let's say, that might create a global negative effect of this war. And thank you for having invited me.
Thank you, Paulo, so much for making yourself available to be here and to bring your reading to us and to share your thoughts with us. They are starting points for further discussion for sure. And there is lots of food for thought from all 3 presentations. So my heart goes to all 3 of you speakers today. You're very, very generous. But there are questions that are coming from the audience, and I would like to ask you some of these questions. I will not ask one at a time. I will give you. I was thinking about 2 questions at a time, and you just pick from where you want and discuss among you what are these topics. So I will start with the first question that emerged, and which is how are these movements in Poland, between Poland and Ukraine, back and forth in return, and how are they managed by the organizations at the border? What are the challenges that are emerging here? And also another question is if these persons, I will not call it refugees, maybe migrants that are coming to Poland, are they actually staying in Poland, waiting to return to the country, or are they evolving to other countries to meet family, friends, other relatives? How are the movements at this point?
Yeah,
Roland, I think this one is more, these are more for you.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, so what I could say is that it's very informal. I mean, as I said, it's not organized from top down. There are no regulations at the high level. So it's organized and managed by these organizations, by private people, by individuals, both Poles and Ukrainians, right in action. So they are there on the border in various little and bigger towns, Polish towns close to the border, and they try to regroup, to organize the processes. Some of them cooperate, some of them are competition, because of course you can also observe like little businesses growing there, right? Like people get some little money for bringing people from the Ukraine to Poland. So for some of them, it means like also significant income. So this is also this business aspect of it. There are also organizations, like of course, lots of non-governmental organizations, but also these big organizations like UN, rooted in UN, and others who are very well organized and prepared for this type of situations. As also Paolo mentioned, that some of these big organizations can very fast move to a place like endangered area or a war zone and support people. So, for example, in Poland we have the Polish the Center for Polish Development Aid, and this is a like pretty big organization that is present there. And what is important, they are present not only on the Polish border, but they're also entering the Ukraine, penetrating the Ukrainian territory. And this makes the difference. I mean, this organization is present also in the Ukraine. It takes people, for example, children from the hospitals or other refugees, and it organized the full process of bringing these people not from the border to the inner parts of the Polish state, but right from Kharkiv or other places there to the border, and then from the border to Warsaw, for example, or other places inside of Poland. So these big organizations, also those which have already experience in this regard, they are ready to support these Ukrainian refugees even without the top organization coordination by the Polish government or other official entities. But small organizations, at least there is no, at least to my knowledge, there is no research on that. But my intuition is that they are kind of lost. I mean, they try to help. As I said, they are already placed there. They moved there. They're waiting. They're trying they're moving some random moves, and it doesn't help much. But they would like to do something. Also, and on the other hand, these individuals, especially Ukrainians, they very well know what to do because they understand the situation. They have families, they have friends, they are very well informed what are the needs of these refugees because they are, for example, one of them. But the problem is that they have limited resources. So this, again, a very logistic question, logistic issue, how to coordinate this, that these organizations that have resources, but they don't have the knowledge what to do with these resources, and there are these Ukrainians or also the Polish citizens that live close to the border and know the situation, and they have knowledge, but they don't have the resources. There is also another important element to emphasize, and this is the type of refugees that come to Poland. So during the first 2 weeks of the war, those who were migrating to Poland, who were crossing the border, were typically people who spoke Polish, have relatives or friends in Poland, and they, right after they came to Poland, they were coming to Poland, they immediately started working somewhere. They already had jobs prepared for them, or it was pretty easy for them to find these jobs, also because of the fact that during the first 2 or 3 weeks, there are many Polish employers who were waiting with open arms to give them jobs. But today, those who migrate, first of all, they don't speak Polish. Secondly, they don't know anyone here in Poland, and not even Ukrainian friends. They have completely no one here. And third point, they have no job, no prospects, nothing. This is the second point that I wanted to mention. And third point, I would say, speaking about this moving more and more west, not many Ukrainians are happy with this, and not many of them decide to do this. Of course, there are some Ukrainians who probably even before the war started, they planned to go to Germany or to Great Britain to work there or something, and they used this opportunity to move more towards west, to Western states. But the huge, vast majority of these refugees, they probably prefer to stay as close to the border as possible for at least 3 reasons. First of all, because cultural-wise, they're pretty similar to Poles, and we kind of understand each other better. Also, even at this very linguistic level, if you speak Ukrainian, if you're a Ukrainian, then you understand something. It's like Spanish and Portuguese. I believe that the difference between Polish and Ukrainian is kind of similar to this difference. So we understand something, not much, but something, and it's already a lot if you're lost in another country, right? Then, secondly, this is also they prefer to stay close to the border because some of them, at least, but I would even guess that many of them believe that the conflict will be finished soon, and it's easier to get back if you're not that far away. And third point, because they still have friends or families in the Ukraine. So, for example, many mothers have sons fighting already in the Ukraine. So even though they escaped from the Ukraine, they stay 50 kilometers from the border to even get back there if they just got the message that their son was wounded or something, right? So these are like really, really tragic stories, but this very much affects the schemes of movement of these refugees.
Thank you so much, Roland, for your insightful knowledge and construction here. There are more questions here. I would say that at this point, we have probably one for each one of you. One of the questions is, Roland, you mentioned that you had classes, and during the classes, students were in Ukraine, and you could hear the bombs coming down. And what is the attitude of the other side? What is the attitude of the Russian students towards the sanctions that currently are being posed on Russia?
This is a very good question, and I would say it not only refers to Russians, but it also refers. I would say it refers somehow. It refers to anyone who doesn't think exactly as the mainstream message goes. What I mean by this, there are some people who support Putin. There are some people who, for example, support Russia or are against sanctions. There are like different positions, of course. To support Putin and to be against sanctions, they're like 2 different opinions. But still, this is not the main line. The main line is, I don't know, do the worst things to the Russia, and what we even observe also in Poland, like Russians being beaten, like cars with Belarusian plates are being damaged, etc., etc. Yeah, so we have a lot of violence against Russians and Belarusians in Poland, even though we don't know what are the views or attitudes of these people. But this is just I would say, typical reaction of the society somehow. So people don't think too much, but they just destroy everything that is related to Russia or Belarus today. But of course, among us, there are people who think differently. And of course, among these Russian students that we have, I guess there are also some who think differently. But the thing is, in Poland today, that you cannot say anything pro-Russian, and you cannot say anything against Ukraine. The social support for the Ukraine, this solidarity, this positive attitude is so strong that if you even hesitate or, I don't know, take into consideration different views, then immediately you are being ostracized. This is, I would say, today in Poland, to say something not clearly against Putin is already embarrassing. So everyone should follow this line. And I believe that even if we have Russian students who are pro-Putin or pro-Russian or against sanctions or whatever, they don't say about it. So in the end, or at least they stay silent. Yeah? So they either, if we speak now precisely about these Russian students that we have, they either speak in a pro-Ukrainian language and against Russia, and they say that they always were in the opposition, they always didn't accept Putin, etc. This is one position, and the other position is that they don't say anything. And if they don't say anything, then you have to guess what they think. But definitely nobody is I don't know, brave enough, if he or she thinks so, to support Putin or Russia or whatever. And to a certain extent, I would say this is not good that we are not able to have this open debate about it. Yeah, but we cannot. And it's the same situation like it was with COVID, for example. So there was so much pressure, for example, that everyone has to be vaccinated, everyone has to be afraid of the virus, etc., etc., that we didn't have a platform to discuss, to have a discussion between those who are, for example, pro-vaccinations and those who are against vaccination. I'm not saying that this or other side is right and the other is wrong. I don't want to discuss it now. But what I'm saying is that we were lacking a platform to discuss it openly, because, for example, it was embarrassing to say that I am against vaccinations or something. And today in Poland, this is embarrassing to say I am against sanctions against Russia, right? And this somehow kills the discussion and hides the problem.
Thank you, Roland. And I would like to ask also a question to Paulo. Paulo, you were just mentioning a while ago, in the last part of your communication, that you already foresee famine in many countries, mainly in Africa, in the last quarter of this year, which is, well, it still gives us, when I say us, I say the world, some time, but nonetheless, if we don't move fast, it will actually happen. Do you see, from your such broad knowledge, do you already see some movements towards trying to overcome these shortages? Well, we do have the World Food Programme, but what they do is they pick donations from one place to the other. And at this point, we still have demand, we have higher demand than ever, but at the same time, now we don't have supply. We don't have the food, the surplus to be sent to those countries. How do you see this? Do you see already any movements trying to overcome this?
At this stage, what we have is the early warning by the World Food Programme and UN system. So the United Nations system made an early warning because this is amplified by the problems of drought in Africa. So there is, we expect a poor summer from the point of view of the capacity to produce food. As you said, now we need a second step, that is to know if the international community is going to be mobilized. And for that, I have no information of any concrete step at this stage. And it's always a reason for fear, because when momentum is somewhere else, when attentions are focused somewhere else, and when efforts are focused somewhere else, we might have a lower capacity of mobilizing the international community. And another reason to be somehow pessimistic is some division in the international community for all these tensions. In any case, at this stage, the system that is prepared to answer to these kind of questions is working. And so the big question mark is the capacity to have mobilization of international community in time and in a dimension proportional with the needs. So let's be optimistic that at our level, that's the only thing we can be.
Thank you, Paulo. I think we got all the message. The sound is not completely 100%, but I think you were able to address this topic, which was very interesting. So let's see how our things evolve, and let's hope for the best. And well, my sense is that I could continue here the rest of the evening talking to you, but it's way past the hour. And
sorry, but
no, it's always so interesting to speak to you. Thank you so much. So it's already past the hour. The questions are almost all addressed. I will just evolve to our conclusion, and obviously I need to give a warm thank you to our three guest speakers, Bruno, Paulo, and Roland. Thank you so much for being here with us today and bring your expertise and your vision on this topic, and also share it with our students, our audience today. I would also obviously like to thank the audience and the interesting questions that were raised and were shared here. I hope I was able to bring all of them to our guest speakers. And once again, thank you also to ISCTE to promote and host this kind of event on behalf of the Master in Humanitarian Action. Thank you so much all, and I do wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.